If anyone's wondering about coming into shipping, this is an exciting industry to be in. And if you're a developer, if you're an engineer, if you're an investor sitting outside looking in, then, some of the most exciting things that are going to happen in this industry.
That's the voice of Nick Clarke, CEO of Greywing, and today's guest on the podcast. Greywing is a digital platform that provides clients with greater situational awareness of their fleet and personnel. In today's podcast, Nick will talk about how he started Greywing, the advantages of being a startup in Singapore, and what's on the horizon in terms of funding this year. Thanks for listening to the pod, and don't forget to follow. Now, on to the show. Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. On today's podcast, we have CEO of Greywing, Nick Clarke. Greywing is a digital platform that automates anything that gets on or off of a vessel, excluding the cargo. Right now, they are focused on automating crew changes with an eye towards the future of applying the same methodology to other consumables such as spare parts, ship stores, lubes, and even bunkers. They do all this with a digital platform that acts as a connective tissue for vessel operators that pulls all their vendors and data into a single user interface. Nick, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for coming on.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, it's a pleasure and great to meet you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I've heard a lot about you. You've been a little bit all over the social media, and I've seen, you guys have been featured in a lot of places and won a couple of awards. So it's really great to have you on. So talk to us a little bit. I love to hear kind of your journey with Greywing and kind of how this came about, because I think this is a pretty interesting approach to what you're doing here.
Yeah, sure. So Greywing really came out of, I was in the UK. I was running a security company that protected ships from piracy in the Indian Ocean and West Africa. And that industry had started to commoditize. And I thought to myself, I'd like to stay in shipping. I love the industry. I know a lot about it. But where do I go from here? So I actually moved to Singapore with this idea in my head that I might have the opportunity to set up a digital platform or a digital company, because it really seemed to me, working in that traditional business, that digitization, digital platforms were the future. So I came here and actually got accepted to this startup incubator, Entrepreneur First, which is supported by the Singapore government. Singapore government were kind enough to give me an entrepreneur's visa, which basically means if you come to Singapore and set up a company within the first year, they'll give you another year to start making money, and then they just keep extending the visa. So that's, how I got to Singapore and how I really got started here. So that was awesome. And then I was lucky enough to meet my co-founder, who had no experience in shipping, but was awesome at building technology, Rishi Olakul. So we sat down and we had a bit of a chat, and, I said, look, I don't know what's going to happen next, but what I've seen happen, in the past 10, 15 years is we had this massive conflagration in Iraq, and then there was this huge bubble of security that pulled in a lot of resources, and it was an extremely challenging time. And then we had a similar bubble within the Indian Ocean around, that really started to kick off around 2008. And it's actually just this January that the Indian Ocean high-risk area has been, removed, if you like, by IMO or Lloyd's War Risk Committee. I'm not sure which one's responsible for that. We'd seen these kind of massive bubbles come up, and I said, look, I'm not sure what the next bubble is going to be, but what I know is that every so often there's some kind of global security event which requires a lot of resources, a lot of manpower. And one of the key problems that the world has is getting the right people with the right skill set into that bubble to mitigate the threat. So I said, it's definitely not going to be maritime security, because, this bubble's kind of, we're getting to the end of this one. But why don't we set up a platform that basically solves this problem in the maritime security industry and anticipate that next bubble coming along, that next risk or security bubble. Now, we had no idea what it would be. There's plenty of conflicts happening all around the world. And, so we set up this platform. You could source a maritime security team in East Africa, or you could source a security escort vessel in West Africa around the Gulf of Guinea, Nigeria, Togo, and Benin. And then COVID happened. And, we realized over, not immediately, but over a period of weeks, that this was that bubble. This was that global bubble of risk that the world now had to deal with. And, in some way, we needed to help people, move resources into the bubble to solve it. So I think because we were working in shipping, the access and the customers that we had were basically people that said, look, I don't know where I can do a crew change. And what we realized was that we could pull out the piracy intelligence from our platform, replace it with intelligence on where a vessel could do a crew change. And then instead of looking at the risk of being kidnapped or pirated, if you like, you could look at, where am I going to be able to do a crew change within 20 nautical miles of my vessel's voyage plan? And that's what we took to market. And, within a couple of months, we had some huge shipping clients. We were working with, kind of Hafnia and OSM. And, that was extremely successful for us. And, we really kind of found this traction. We found a problem that the market really needed solving. So long story short, that's how we found ourselves in shipping, working in crew change optimization.
When I started this podcast, I'm not a podcaster, right? I'm a maritime guy. But so I did my research and I started to look at how do people who do storytelling and interviewing, how do they pull out those sort of things? And one of the questions which you answered, which is a great question, which is how did you start and where are you today? And I think that that's really fascinating because you started with one problem, a problem that you were familiar with, logistics around, basically logistics around a security incident, let's say. And even without COVID, you probably could have found some with what's going on in Russia and other places that there's always kind of a need for getting around these sort of hotspots as it is. But certainly COVID lent very well to that. And I think your comment to the extent of we saw the problem and we have a solution for it is very telling because a lot of times, and you see this with maybe not so much in maritime, but certainly in other areas. And I say, blockchain, there are applications for blockchain, but everybody thought blockchain was going to solve everything. It was a solution looking for a problem where you guys had a solution that was similar and there was an actual problem. So when, tell me more about that when you went into the Hafnias, as you mentioned, or these other owners, what was it like their reaction? Because I think that that's kind of interesting where you had somewhat of a tailor-made solution for an evolving problem.
A tailor-made solution for an evolving problem is probably what we've managed to develop, maybe almost two years later. 3 years later, actually, it's actually time flies.
Yeah, it'll be 3 years. It's like this that blows my mind. I've been sitting in my basement for 3 years.
Tell me about it. When we went to see customers around that time, I think we had a solution that worked, and there was nothing else on the market that was trying to solve this problem. I think most people said, look, there's nothing that can be done. It's too complex. And, I think it's only because I was working with someone who's extremely proficient from a technological perspective that he was able to say, look, I can pull this data in, I've got the skill set to be able to do this. And so we were able to deliver, an MVP, a product that kind of solved the basic problem of someone looking to do crew changes. And then actually when we see a customer, they said to us, well, to be honest, all right, you're showing me where I can do crew changes, but this doesn't work unless I can see where I can actually get a flight. If I can do a crew change and there's no flight home for the seafarer, then this doesn't solve my problem. So, again, we were led by the customer. And I think the first insight that we had, and the only real insight that we've had within this business, is that we could replace the piracy intelligence with intelligence on where you could do a crew change. But everything else has been led by our customers. The reason we, ended up getting that contract and that client started working with us was because within, I think, 2 weeks, we were able to go back to them and say, okay, you can not only see where you can do a crew change, we can also show you the flights in any of the ports of call that the vessel is going to make. And so it was kind of a step change again. But to be honest, that was only possible because Amadeus, which is a global distribution system, had a kind of open API, open developers sandbox, if you like, where you could just plug in, you could source the flights, you could get into their global distribution system, you could play around with it, see what it could do. And because they were extremely forward thinking in, being willing to put their software and, essentially their resources out there for people really to experiment with. My co-founder Rishi was able to take that and turn it into a solution. And I think coming into the maritime industry, we can look at other industries that are very similar to ours, such as aviation, so logistics, transport, globally distributed industry. So it's got some similar characteristics. And to evolve in that industry, they'd opened everything up. So they'd said, come in, try this platform out, play with it. Don't pay us any money. And then if it works, maybe we start working with you in a couple of years. And I think it was actually a couple of years before, they started charging us anything. So it was extremely, reasonable. But it helped us evolve and it helped them evolve. And I think, when I look at the maritime industry, I think we're a few phases away from getting to a position where platforms are willing to say, look, here's our open APIs, here's our documentation, go out, see what you can do with it and come back to us if you think you've got a a decent integration, or you've developed a tool that we wouldn't have been able to think of. And I think from a startup's perspective, coming into this industry, working in the aviation industry, a bit further along on the technology side, we could just pick up those tools, work with them, build something new, get that into the market, solve a problem for people. Whereas trying to do a similar thing in the maritime industry is extremely challenging. People in the maritime industry, from a kind of incumbent perspective, they look at the technology that they own and they think about how to stop other people from coming in so they can keep what's theirs. They're not looking at growing the ecosystem as a whole. They're looking at maintaining their specific market share. That's interesting from our perspective because, we're an integrator. We integrate with all these different platforms. So what we're finding is we're kind of identifying other members, if you like, of the resistance who are trying to actually bring something into the industry, who are happy to give us data for free. One great example is Portcast. So we use their data to pull out container vessel schedules, so we can pull out any container vessel schedule that they are currently tracking. And it means if we work with the container operator, we can just pull up their vessel schedule. We've already got their voyage plan integrated into the platform, so it just makes it much easier for them. We've got another crewing ERP provider who I won't mention, although they probably would have wished that I did, but I can't mention it just because we're under an NDA. And again, they've just thrown it open. They've just said, look, here you go. Here's our API documentation. Here's everything that we're doing. See what you can make happen, see what you can do with this. And that's the exciting thing that we're starting to see. But if I'm honest, it's taken about 3 years for us to start, solving those problems and getting to that openness with some providers in the industry where we can really begin to experiment with the future.
That's something that we're starting to see with other relatively new folks. I had on someone from Zero North, that is looking to do collaboration. Now, they have their own platform with kind of on the bunker side, and and they have an emissions angle and what have you. But they're talking about collaboration, and I think it's going to be very interesting as people come into the industry or established folks start to expand and start to work with others, collaborate about, like you said, hey, I have an API. Here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to do with it. And maybe at some point there is, some exchange of money, okay, well, this is what it is. But at some point, this is where it comes in. Am I a be all to everybody, or do I kind of just stay in my realm and work with others as these things pull in? And I think I think it has to do with, the industry is so kind of, that's why it's called the Last Dinosaur, is very resistant to this. But even kind of, I'm a product manager of a product that we sell to ship brokers. And, you definitely have some of the established kind of older companies that skews a little bit older, what have you. But as they're starting to hire younger folks, and as, spin off of these companies are founded by, men and women who are in their 30s or whatever, a little younger, they're asking me questions. Well, do you guys have an API? And I've been starting to think about this from my point of view, just in the sense of, is this where, not necessarily with my product, but all products are going? Not only do you have to have an offering as on a screen, but then you have to have, okay, if you don't want my screen, you don't like it, here's my API, but it's going to cost you. And I can make it look pretty, but if you want to do it in because you have your little dashboard that you built with a Power BI thing and you like it your way, because you're a 1 or 2 person shop and you need to see the information in a way that makes sense to you, fine. I think we're going to be going a lot in that way. Whether or not it's open source at first may be a trust step for people, but I do kind of see that, because I think that as the users get more savvy, they're going to demand that. That's what I kind of feel. Especially as things start to skew a little bit, like I said, a little bit younger, a little bit more kind of open to these ideas. I ran into one client and I said, well, why don't you use this platform? We were talking about something and he goes, I have it all in my head. If you decide to retire tomorrow, then what? Right. I mean, so that's certainly one of the challenges there. One of the things that we have kind of looked at, or at least that you've talked about a little bit, at least on your website, is kind of the emissions angle, which must have opened up a few doors or opened up a few eyes. You'll talk a little bit about that. Did that get you in the door with folks? Because you not only track the crew and where they are, but you also talk about like kind of what their footprint looks like.
Yeah, so we look at the carbon emissions footprint of doing a crew change, primarily around the flights that are used. So I think we're the only platform in the world where when you're planning a crew change, you can say, well, how can I make sure that I plan this crew change using the most carbon efficient flights? And that might come down to I'm willing to spend, up to $900 to make sure I get the most carbon efficient flights, because you can always find a cheaper flight. But often the problem is there might be extra legs, and normally the carbon efficiency is pretty poor. We give that kind of initial ability to have an overview of what a carbon impact of a crew change is going to be, so that you can optimize to have the most carbon efficient crew change if that's what you'd like. If I'm honest, most ship owners don't care. Most ship managers don't care. When we were coming out of COVID, we realized that COVID was going to go away, and just showing people where they could do a crew change isn't going to work. So one of the things that I realized coming into the industry as a security provider was how rapidly anything that contacts or comes into contact with the shipping industry commoditizes. So, really we had to say, look, how do we make sure that we're giving customers value? What we started to look at was we said, look, you can arbitrage between the different ports of call where you might do a crew change, because at the moment people are using these heuristics that are in their head of doing crew changes at the same old places. And all right, they might be right 50, 60, 70% of the time, but often they're not always going to be right if you really look at the data and you're able to develop maybe 5 different crew change options for a vessel and analyze them all in a couple of seconds, instead of just going with the tried and trusted crew change at Suez, because often it's not as efficient. I think the problem is that when we built this lovely feature that would help people optimize their carbon, people only care about it from the perspective of a branding exercise. Actually, what they really care about is costs. So if someone's buying our platform, typically it's because they want to save money. It is true that there's maybe 2 customers that we've spoken to who are genuinely interested in it from the perspective of optimizing on their carbon emissions. But again, these emissions sit within scope 3. So they're not as important to a ship operator, ship owner, as their scope 1 emissions. And it's something that they know they're going to have to do one day, but they're not quite ready to do that yet because they're still struggling with scope 1. So I'd say it's great from a PR perspective. People look at it, they think that isn't that fascinating. But when it comes down to it, why do people buy a platform? They don't buy it because we save them on carbon emissions. You have to go to someone with a clear-cut value proposition that's commercially viable and that gives them a commercial edge over the way that they're currently operating. And maybe eventually the legislation will catch up on scope 3 emissions, and that might help us sell that part of the platform. But right now it's a value proposition that we're delighted we have. And, we push as much as we can, but it's not the one that the customers are buying.
Disagree with you a little bit on waiting for regulations. Mm-hmm. And I've been a proponent of this for a long time. I think that, yes, legislation, whether it's IMO, whether it's here in the US, but we've seen, we've seen that change, right? I mean, we have one White House says, nope, we're getting rid of everything. The next one comes in and said, nope, we're restoring it. So an EU and, not as, it doesn't seem to have that kind of change, but I think they're all well-intentioned and well-meaning. But I really do think the change agent for decarbonization is going to be the consumers and the wallet and the money. And I think that, with things like Poseidon principles, everything from Poseidon principles, which says, look, you have to reduce your carbon footprint. Now, yes, you're talking about on the ship and this at some point, I think ahead of legislation, it's going to be the scope 3 of, well, how efficient are you with crew change and all this other stuff? I think is going to look into it. But I also think, I remember a couple of years ago, it was about 2 years ago now, where you had those protests in Scandinavia, I assume it's Sweden, where people were saying, well, why is that ship, spewing emissions in my port, bringing IKEA stuff here? Like, you have to do better. And it was the consumers. And I think that combination of the money, whether it's institutional money or consumer money, is going to drive this a little faster than, okay, yesterday, 2 days, we're recording this early January, a couple of days ago, CIA started. So now we have to do that. I think that that's going to be ahead. It's going to be driven by consumers ahead of any legislation. So I think that could be something to think about, which works well for you, right? The earlier that people adopt this kind of game changer for you, the better. Something I want to pivot back to, you're in Singapore, You talk about the startup community there. Talk a little bit more about kind of how you're navigating that startup community. There are a lot, not only in Singapore, but Israel, Hamburg, here in the US, there's a couple, and then there's some with the ship owners. Talk a little bit about, that experience. And I'm curious to see, as you start to expand into your rounds of funding, are the waters a little bit more choppier than they were a couple of months ago? Obviously, with interest rates have changed the game a little bit. Talk to me about what you're seeing there on those sort of perspective. But I'm really curious about kind of the founding part, because I think it's important for our community that they have this kind of a type of backing.
Coming to Singapore for me was it was a complete game changer in terms of starting a maritime startup. Firstly, the Singapore government were willing to give me a visa, essentially to come here for 2 years on the off chance that I would start a company and that it would be successful and that we, get funded and be able to employ people. We'd start to build revenue. And, certainly for me, that's definitely been the case. And I'm extremely grateful that that's happened, because when I was in Bristol in England and I approached a local Bristol government-funded startup organization for assistance, they were unable to even give me a desk in a co-working space because they felt like my idea was not defensible. So I think Singapore is willing to take risks, and it's a good place to be from an entrepreneur perspective. I think from a ecosystem perspective, it's also pretty awesome. I'd say, the companies and the people and the work ethic out here is pretty impressive. I know some other startup founders, both within the maritime ecosystem and also more generally. And I'd say, it's great. I've really enjoyed it. It's easy to reach out to people. It's easy to make connections. I think within a mile of where I live, there must be about 120 to 140 customers that we could potentially work with. So it's an extremely strong network from that perspective. It's a good place to be. Don't really know if I can give a good opinion on other startup ecosystems. What I will say is I've been really impressed by startups that I've seen in Athens. I've met a lot of people in Athens when I've been there, on business trips or otherwise at Posidonia. And, they are... I mean, the Greeks are known for shipping, but I think the Greeks will also be known for their startup community. And when I look at the level of support that they receive from their government, I really wonder whether other nations could be doing a better job, because you see a lot of support, a lot of investment going out, but I'm not sure whether you're really seeing the level of development and innovation. Whereas when I go to Athens, I feel like, well, maybe there's not so much government support, but it really doesn't seem to be stopping anyone in Greece from innovating, getting a product to market, and really being commercially ruthless in making stuff happen. So I'd say, if there was somewhere else where I get a bit nervous when I visit, because I think, wow, these guys are really good, it's definitely Athens.
And that's very interesting, because I'll talk about, I noticed how you couched Posidonia. Well, when I was on business or otherwise, Posidonia. Yeah, I know that as well. It was all business for me. I was there for business. I didn't do anything else. I know that that's a good place to kind of get a good outlook. But I do think, that's where the other funding source is coming from is you have, in particular, with Signal kind of in the world that I operate in, the Martino's family, it's a big ship owning family, have this arm, and they've been in business now, I'd say off the top of my head, apologize if I get this wrong, 5-6 years thereabout. They've been building their product, and they're able to do it because they have the comfort of as successful ship owning arms. Again, it's not throwing away money, because they kind of had a good game plan, and they kind of are able to use their model within what they do on a base level, on their core level, but expanded. So that's certainly a really good thing. And you're seeing that with other ship owners. The Offer family, I believe that's out of Singapore, but he's also, I'm not sure if he runs that out of Singapore or Israel, but he has, his kind of fund. The family that owns MSC, a Mediterranean shipping company, they started like more of a decarbonization fund. And of course, the AP Moller Maersk has their whole decarbonization decarbonization initiative as well. So you're also seeing these kind of fairly large tranches of money coming into the industry. Again, maybe a little bit on an angle, like I said, the last two with more decarbonization, but certainly those, are having good footing for money as well. So it's curious to see that. To follow up on my question, as you guys, not sure where you are or how much you could tell us about where you are in fundraisers, has that landscape changed how you guys approach things now, or what I'm finding from other people who we've interviewed and podcasts be coming out soon? It changed it a little bit, but if you have a good product, VC and PE are still looking at you and still able to work with you. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing on that front.
I think the funding market's beginning to dry up. It's going to be a lot harder. We're going to head into a downturn next year. It's going to be pretty brutal. And I think, a lot of people are going to look back and wish they'd done something sooner. I think from our perspective, we're super excited about it because a reduction in funding in the market also means a reduction in the competition. And, from our perspective, we're pretty well funded. We're currently going through another fundraising right now just to make sure that we've got, the level of runway that we'd be comfortable with. But if I'm honest, I'm a little bit reticent to do that because we're, getting towards break even as well. We can really see that adoption of the product coming. But at the same time, I think there's this responsibility that comes when you employ a team of people to make sure that you've got the, funding to guarantee that you're going to be able to, meet that outcome instead of, taking that risk. Obviously as an entrepreneur, I'm, willing to take risks, and it's not true of maybe everyone that is in the organization. I'd say if you're a startup, you want to have money until at least, the end of Q1 2025. And if you don't, then it's going to be pretty challenging. And, you may not guaranteed be able to raise it. I'd also say if you're going to raise it sooner rather than later, or make sure that you get to break even or to profitability. The way that we look at it, we're heading into an environment that most people have never been in. Particularly from a startup perspective, because most people are quite young. I think I'm quite lucky that I was around in 2008. Luckily, I was in the military then, so it didn't affect me because I got my paycheck from Her Majesty. But I think it's going to be a lot more brutal than people realize. I think it's not only going to affect the startups, they'll also find it will affect their customers. And then you won't even only have the challenge of funding yourself. You'll have the challenge of making sure that your customers can fund you as well by meeting their contractual obligations. Having said that, I think, if I go to investors, I say, are you looking for an amazing counter-cyclical industry to invest in? Because that's shipping. And, what I also know is true that there's large multinational organizations that work, kind of on the fringes of the shipping world. And what they realized during the downturn throughout COVID, where many, many businesses came to a halt, was that they realized that actually shipping keeps going. And shipping, they continue to be customers, they continue to buy goods and services. All of the people working within shipping continue to operate. And all right, there's a lot of friction. It's much more challenging to get those people on and off the vessels, but the industry doesn't stop. And so what I know is going to happen is, at the moment, I know that some large organizations are investing more heavily in, I think, what they call marine mining and energy, those industries that keep going to keep the world ticking over. And so I think from our perspective, not only is that happening, but our customers are also going to continue operating. They're not going to be affected by the industry of itself. Individual customers, of course, will be affected, but the industry as itself, as a whole, will keep going, which is extremely positive for us in terms of, continuing to grow and continuing to get the product to market.
Especially if you look at the whole industry, right? I think what a lot of people saw, kind of expected at the beginning of last year and the beginning of 2022, end of 21, is that container markets will come off, dry bulk kind of in the middle, and tankers are going to come up. And that's kind of what happened for the most part. I want to oversimplify. Certainly, container ships, at least rates have come off. It's going to be a little bit very interesting to continue to watch at. This podcast is not about predicting that sort of future. But what's nice is, I think what you said is that you still need to tick over. There's still going to be people that are going to be profitable. There are people who aren't going to be, but it's still going to need to tick over. You're not going to, if a company is no longer in existence, well, those ships still move, right? Maybe not all of them, maybe they scrap some of them, but there's still going to be crew for them. They're still going to need fuel. They're still going to need goods. They're still going to need people to charter the ships. Maybe, they get shuffled around, but certainly it doesn't, necessarily stop. And I think that that's, something that people don't necessarily understand fully, and until maybe recently, until they had the supply chain disruption. Certainly here in the US, if you went to Walmart and tried to get paper towels, 3 years ago, well, I'm sure there are people who hoarded so many, they're still going through toilet paper right now. So, but anyway, but yeah, I think you're right there. As we wrap up, I love to ask a question, and I love to see what people say about this. And that is, what book are you reading? Are you reading anything? I know being an entrepreneur, maybe you don't have any time to read. As we start the new year, people say, goal of reading a half an hour a day, and so on. Anything on that front, or is it like, yeah, I read, perspectives or prospectuses or something like that?
I read Twitter. Do you know what? So last year,
it'll fry your brain if you read too much of that. I do try to limit.
It's a difficult habit, but one of the few bad ones I've got. I think it's funny. A year ago, an investor gave me a book called The High Growth Handbook, book by a guy called Eli Gill, and I remember at the time he gave it to me, it was wrapped in plastic, and I thought, "Wow, this looks brilliant." I'd really like to get into it, but actually, we're not going through high growth. So I don't know if this is the right time. So I left it for a year, and I've just read it, and it was awesome. So if you're an entrepreneur, you're kind of product market fit, I'd recommend High Growth Handbook by Eli Gill. Something that's maybe a bit more topical, which recently came out. So I remember when I came into the maritime industry, one of the stories that was doing the rounds was this ship that had been pirated off the coast of Yemen. And within 2 hours of this ship being pirated, this salvage tug had turned up and been able to claim salvage, which means they basically now own this vessel because the vessel was abandoned and not under control. And then, all these other really shady things started happening around this vessel. And, I was kind of watching it from the sidelines of, reading Lloyd's List or Tradewinds or whatever. And they've actually just released a book about it. The vessel is called the Brillante Virtuoso. And it's just this crazy story. The book is called Dead in the Water. It's by Matthew Campbell and a guy called Kit Chilell. And it's this crazy story, essentially, of, I think, basically an insurance scam that was run on a vessel that was, apparently hijacked, but apparently that never happened, so that someone could, get a big insurance payout off of this vessel. And, it even goes as far as an investigator who went to Yemen to investigate and find out what had happened, sadly being murdered by, one of the only attacks by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula at the time. So, I think if you're outside this industry and you're thinking, shipping, it can't be that much of a dinosaur. It's got to be pretty modern. I'm almost certain if you read this book, you'll find out why one of the reasons that people love opaqueness and fight against transparency is because for a long time in shipping, what happened offshore stayed offshore. And that information would never come back. It would never get dealt with. And there was a lot of money to be made offshore in many, many different ways from that lack of transparency. And I think one of the reasons that shipping is the last industry to truly digitize, and why it's probably the lowest hanging fruit in a world where almost every other industry has become digitized, is because that lack of transparency benefits many people in the industry for many different reasons. And I think if you read this book, you'll get a sense of the kind of opaqueness and how it benefits people, but you'll also begin to understand why there's so much opportunity here for digital organizations, digital companies, startups to disrupt, come into, and improve this industry. So that's probably going to be my recommendation. I've got to be honest, I've not read it. I know the story pretty well, but I've given it to all my friends, and I've got a copy on my Kindle.
I have. I just ordered it a couple of days ago. I've seen it. I think somebody else who was on the podcast talked about the book. And I just saw a review. John Conrad of G Captain had it as his book of the year. And I'm like, I should order it. And I did. I ordered it. And I'm looking forward to reading it. It's probably something that I read. And my father-in-law is a big reader. I'll probably give it to him. He'll probably consume it in like a day. He'll sit in an easy chair and I'll be like, I'm done. That was pretty good. That's kind of how my conversations go. When he reads a book, he's pretty fast with that. So yeah, that's a good one. There's a series. I think there's 2 books or 3 books. Matt McCleary, I think, at at Marine Money. He's written a couple of books. They're fiction, one called The Shipping Man, which is sitting on my bookshelf, which is also kind of gives it's an outsider who I think invests in ships, and then all this bizarre stuff happens. I have to read that one too. So certainly there is a lot there, and I appreciate you sharing with that. So as we wrap up, Nick, thank you for coming on the pod. This was really interesting. I really appreciate the way you talked a little bit about your time kind of building Greywing. Pretty cool stuff. And then, really giving an insider's view on kind of on the startup community and your experience in Singapore, because I think that's important, because it's something that this industry definitely benefits from. So thanks for coming on the podcast, Nick.
Awesome, Chris. I mega appreciate this. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if anyone's wondering about coming into shipping, this is an exciting industry to be in. And if you're a developer, if you're an engineer, if you're an investor sitting outside looking in, then some of the most exciting things that are going to happen in this industry. And I'll finish on this. The thing to understand about shipping is that 70% of the vessels in the world are operated by owners that have 20 vessels or less. It's got one of the biggest long tails in any industry. And one of the things that long tails are normally associated with is the disruption of the business models that run that industry. So I think for me, what keeps me awake at night is wondering, how do we reach out to, how do we serve 70% of the people in the industry that have less than 20 vessels? Because that's where the real power lies. It doesn't lie with the Maersks. It doesn't lie with the MSCs of the world. It lies with the people who have got 5 to 10 vessels from a perspective that they come together and operate as a single entity.
I've never heard that. That is probably one of the more fascinating things that I've come across on this podcast, which is why I like to do this. I've been in the industry for a long time, but there's stuff I find out all the time. Nick, once again, thanks for coming on the pod.
Have a great day. Thanks, Chris. Bye-bye.